The Pokemon Quagsire has terrible stats and is often ranked in lower tiers of competitive singles. But don't let that deceive you. Quagsire is often a cornerstone of specific strategies in higher power level formats like OU. Quagsire even sees a solid amount of use in Ubers among legendaries, and even Anything Goes, the highest power level format in the entire game, where there are no rules or restrictions to what you can use at all. Why does Quagsire, with its terrible stats, still see use in the same tier as Zacian Crown? In most cases, the most important factor that determines a Pokemon's viability is their stats. But stats are not always everything. Sometimes, Pokemon who do have impressive stat numbers aren't very desirable competitively, due to poor typing or limited move pools. And sometimes, Pokemon with terrible stats can be great competitively if they make up for it enough in other areas. Let's explore some examples of great Pokemon with horrible stats. Like this video and subscribe to the channel to prevent Quagsire's conquest from going beyond the point of no return. Thank you. Quagsire was introduced in Generation 2, where it was the first ever water ground type Pokemon. This would go on to be known as one of the best type combinations in the entire game, with only a single weakness to grass, and many valuable resistances and immunities. Quagsire's options in its debut game were much more limited than they would be later. Quagsire does not have access to Water Absorb or Unaware, because abilities don't even exist yet. Quagsire also lacks the immediate healing of Recover. But despite this, Quagsire still had a pretty strong start in Generation 2 OU off its typing alone. Quagsire is one of the few things in the game that can reliably switch in against Raikou and Zapdos, who are extremely common top tier threats. Quagsire is immune to Electric completely and shrugs off hidden power damage from the common Water and Ice coverage types. Grass is rarely seen in this generation because it is not able to hit common targets like Steelix or Rhydon. Quagsire takes full advantage of this and can be quite a sturdy answer to these common threats, purely thanks to the defensive benefits of its typing. Quagsire can also take advantage of its powerful Belly Drum and Stab Earthquake to turn into an offensive sweeper too in its debut game. In Gen 3, Quagsire did receive an ability, Water Absorb. This is not the ability that it would be most known for later in the series, but even this was quite solid. Water Absorb grants a complete immunity to water type attacks and even heals you if you get hit by one. Quagsire had some new competition, with Swampert releasing in Generation 3, a new water ground type that is overall better with its stats and move pool, but Quagsire still has its niche uses thanks to this unique ability. With Water Absorb, Quagsire can actually 1v1 a lot of Suicune sets, since it's pretty common for Suicune to only run a water type attack as its sole attacking option. Quagsire therefore hard walls these Suicune sets, and on top of this it can still serve mostly the same defensive purpose that Swampert does against powerful rock types and other physical threats in the tier. Quagsire can also take advantage of Curse to boost itself up and act as a win condition. It's overall outclassed by Swampert, but this niche of Water Absorb gives it some uses on certain teams, which I think goes to show the value of a solid defensive typing and a complementary ability. And speaking of which, Quagsire would really come into its own after receiving the fantastic ability Unaware in the Generation 5 games. Unaware is one of the best defensive abilities in the entire franchise, with the effect of ignoring the enemy Pokemon's stat changes completely. Boost sweepers are incredibly common in competitive Pokemon as win conditions, aiming to end game, but Quagsire's ability Unaware completely ignores all of the extra stats gained from boosts. Even if a Pokemon has maxed out their attack stat completely with boosts, Quagsire will take damage as if they had zero. And because it has such a great defensive typing with only a single weakness that is easy to cover elsewhere on your team, Quagsire would soon become a cornerstone of stall teams. Stall is a team style that aims to slow the game down and defensively respond to all of your enemy's attempts to break through and win the game. And Quagsire perfectly fits here as a counter to the entire concept of physical boost sweepers. Not only can it ignore all of their offensive boosts, it has fantastic utility options. Quagsire would eventually gain Recover, a fantastic immediate healing option. It of course has Toxic to apply poison to the enemy and put them on a clock. And Quagsire also has Scald, a water type special attack with a chance to burn. Even Stab Earthquake comes in handy quite a bit. Quagsire is a rare instance of a Pokemon with bad stats that is ranked in lower tiers by usage that is still very much viable and effective in higher tiers anyway. In most generations, Quagsire is the ultimate Unaware wall that is famously difficult to break through and actually defeat. And eventually this would even prove useful in the Ubers format. In Generation 8, one of the most powerful legendaries of all time was released, Zacian Crown. Zacian Crown is an unbelievably powerful Pokemon in Generation 8, with some of the highest stats of all time. Most notably a 170 base attack and an ability that permanently raises your attack by 1 stage. On top of this, Zacian Crown is extremely fast, outrunning the vast majority of other legendaries. It's quite bulky with high defenses and a great defensive typing of Fairy Steel, and the Pokemon's offensive move pool is also very effective, with the signature move Behemoth Blade up its sleeve, Close Combat for coverage, and even Swords Dance to boost itself up. Zacian Crown eventually had to be banned from the Ubers format, which very rarely happens. It was just that powerful, with almost nothing that could counter it effectively. But I did just say almost nothing, because Quagsire turned out to be the most consistent answer to Zacian Crown in the entire game. Despite the enormous stat difference between these two Pokemon, it doesn't matter who you are. If you're a physical boost sweeper, you will not beat Quagsire. Much of Zacian Crown's damage output comes from its Intrepid Sword boost, granting an attack raise at all times, but because of Unaware, Quagsire completely ignores this permanent attack boost, and it completely ignores Swords Dance boosts as well. Quagsire is only weak to grass, and Zacian Crown does not have a grass type attack, except for Solar Blade, which is only effective in the sun, and not commonly used on the Pokemon. And Quagsire also happens to resist Behemoth Blade conveniently. The highest damage attack that Zacian Crown has against Quagsire is generally Play Rough for Fairy Stab, which is just shy of 2-hit KOing the Pokemon. With a Rocky Helmet equipped, Quagsire can wear down Zacian Crown as they're attacking it, or Quagsire can go for an Earthquake for super effective damage. Quagsire can also wall other boost sweepers in Anything Goes or Ubers, such as Zygarde Complete Form. In Gen 9, Quagsire has a lot more competition from the new Unaware Pokemon Skeledirge and Dondozo, who are a bit sturdier. Skeledirge in particular has become more popular in Ubers for its positive matchup into Zacian Crown and Koraidon. But Quagsire definitely has a legacy of being a premier Unaware wall throughout multiple generations, striking fear into the hearts of even the strongest Pokemon in the entire series. Another example of a competitively successful Pokemon with mostly terrible stats would be Amoonguss. Amoonguss has an unexciting grass poison type combination, and apart from a solid HP stat, pretty average stats everywhere else. But Amoonguss was able to overcome its poor stats with 2 simple traits. It's access to the ability Regenerator and the move Spore. Regenerator is an outstanding defensive ability, allowing you to heal 1/3 of your max HP whenever you switch out. This is the safest way to heal in the entire game. Healing while you switch out means you are not in danger of an incoming attack, and these Pokemon can get up to full health again very quickly thanks to Regenerate. Access to this ability enhances Amoonguss's defensive longevity where its stats wouldn't. And every time it enters the field, it has access to one of the best moves in the game to click. Spore is a 100% accurate sleep-inflicting move that is very scarce and very sought after. Putting an enemy Pokemon to sleep is incredibly impactful and will prevent them from acting at all for multiple turns. While the grass poison typing of Amoonguss has its drawbacks, you have enough entry points against specific enemies for Amoonguss to function well defensively and form an important part of a team's defensive core. Being poison type means you resist fighting and fairy, and also gives you some counterplay against toxic spikes, removing them on switch-in. Grass typing complements poison by making you neutral to ground instead of weak to it, and also provides valuable resistance to water. My final example is a recent one, debuting in Generation 9, and perhaps the most competitively successful of all these Pokemon I've talked about so far, and that is Hisuian Samurott. Hisuian Samurott is ranked in OU and is a consistently high-performing Pokemon in the metagame, which is interesting. Gen 9 is a very demanding world with a high power level, and many staples of former OU formats just do not cut it anymore. They have been outclassed or fallen off in various ways. But Hisuian Samurott, with its overall very average stat distribution, stands tall. Hisuian Samurott has very similar stats to the original Samurott, a Pokemon that was not very competitively relevant at all for multiple generations in a row. And Hisuian Samurott proved to be significantly more viable with only a couple of changes. Hisuian Samurott gained a Dark typing, overall a buff granting immunity to psychic and important resistances, as well as stab damage on dark type attacks. Hisuian Samurott gained the ability Sharpness, which grants a 1.5 times damage boost to slicing based moves, which you have plenty of, greatly increasing the damage output of this Pokemon. But these would be nothing if not for a single move that Hisuian Samurott has access to. Its signature move, Ceaseless Edge. This is one of the best moves in Pokemon history. A 65 power Dark-type attack that also sets a layer of spikes on the field when it connects. Ceaseless Edge is also a slicing move, so it has its power boosted by 1.5 times, granting it a power of 97.5. Spikes on its own is already one of the best moves in Pokemon history, a simple entry hazard that deals damage to grounded Pokemon whenever they switch in. So of course, dealing significant stab damage with a Dark-type attack, the best offensive type in the game arguably, while setting spikes at the same time is an incredibly powerful concept. Combining short-term and long-term progress into one move makes Hisuian Samurott a no-brainer on aggressive teams and one of the most effective hazard setters in the metagame. And beyond just hazard setting, those sharpness boosted coverage options like Sacred Sword and Aqua Cutter come in handy as well. Hisuian Samurott is a great example of what it takes to make an otherwise average Pokemon extremely powerful, with only a couple of simple changes. Who is your favorite example of a great Pokemon with terrible stats? Let me know down below in the comments, and thank you for watching.